How'd you all get over here so fast? Very quick. I imagine there are a few others still joining us, so I'll hold on just a moment. While we wait, I'm really curious to hear what you've learned or seen during the Moot so far. Like anything that I should make sure to go back and record or go back and watch, or any big ahas, any ideas? Ooh, tell me about that, JW. Wakelet, is that what you call it? And I think Matt's got the coolest room ever.
Well, thank you.
I really liked Sarah's presentation on databases. There's lots of, I didn't have time to explore into them yet, but she gave examples of each and the settings you can download to explore on your own. So I'm excited to spend some more time with those.
Awesome. Teresa, I do have a copy of the slides linked in the course. Will that meet your needs? Sorry,
So
regarding the question.
we have to go through a VPN with the state, and they've got us locked down so tight I can't access it.
Got it. Okay, I will look for that. Yeah, and thank you, Jessica. Sorry, I was obviously reading the chat at the same time. Yeah, I'm excited to look at Sarah's presentation because I found the database to be so challenging to get it to set up to look good. You know, it's not like crazy hard to set up, but it usually looks so, let's say less than impressive with the default settings. Okay, so Wakelet is a platform collaboration and presentation that is user-friendly and free. Free is always nice. Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out. Can you give me another tool that is comparable, like that I might recognize, that I would put it in the same category as?
That's hard. It's almost like H5P meets Google presentation.
Oh,
Kind of.
cool.
Yeah. Someone might have a better explanation, but that's my closest analogy.
It's always tricky if you've come up with something really innovative to find a way to help people describe it and classify it. But yeah, it's like awesome and challenging all at the same time. Okay, definitely lots of votes for Wakelet. I'm gonna have to check that out. Ooh, and Padlet, yes. I like Padlet too. Are they by chance? I know lots of companies now, there are like so many words that have been used. Padlet plus Google Press plus HP. Yes. I was just wondering if Padlet and Wakelet are by the same company, since, you know, they're both let. Definitely have to do some digging. So I think we've got a good group here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Plug for your own presentation. Yes. H5P is awesome, and it's always fun to see what other people are doing with that. Is your presentation next, Lance? Or did you do it earlier or yesterday?
I did it yesterday at 11 yesterday.
Okay. I will have to check that out too. There are so many features there. Have you played with, oh, what's it called? The application, Jess, you might remember, it's the application that Ted's been talking about that he's using to develop the H5P offline.
Oh, it's slipping my mind. I'll look
You're
it up.
talking about Lumi education?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes, Lumi. Yeah. Yeah, Ted on our team has been enamored with that. And we're, we've been talking about pros, cons, what it works for and what it doesn't.
Right.
I was just curious if you're an H5P guy, if you'd played with that.
Yeah, my presentation talks a little bit about H5P and getting started, so, or Lumi education and getting started.
Cool. Awesome.
Has there been anything new on the H5P front for fixing reporting? Because it doesn't report especially well.
I know with reporting, I think it works really well as far as h5p.com because it's stored on their servers, right? With the Moodle, I'd have to double check and see how that one works because I usually use it for just formative and I don't really use it for graded activities. So I'm not positive about the reporting aspect.
I feel like it has improved some, but yeah, that h5p.com, I'll second that. We had a client using that integration. And if you do the full on integration with the h5p.com, then you can get more data. But yeah, I know I've seen more data coming in through H5P and Moodle too. So
I just need it to report like completion.
oh,
And getting it to do that is the things people have to do to get it to do it is that's not obvious, and then they don't get credit, and then they tear out their hair and freak out. And anyway.
Yeah, like on the interactive video, they have to make sure and hit like that submit on the last slide.
Yes.
And yes.
And that's the thing that I have used it for.
Yeah. It is a challenge. I hear you. All right, let's go ahead and dig into what you're all presumably here for. Thank you for spending, your morning with me and being here to talk about how to make online learning easier. Really is the goal. For those of you who have not, if we've not met before, I am MichelleMoore. As Martin mentioned in the keynote, I'm co-founder of My Learning Consultants, soon to be Moodle US. I've spent probably 17, 18 years working with Moodle and helping different organizations figure out how to create online learning experiences. Got the master's degree in instructional design and technology, and all but dissertation on the doctorate, where I've really been continuing to think about how to design online courses well. And this presentation really comes out of those 15 plus years of experience working with other trainers and teachers and facilitators, and seeing things that they're doing that makes their job harder than it needs to be. Part of this is driven by philosophy as well. As I mentioned in Martin's session, again, I'm a big fan of the interaction, authentic learning experiences and things like that. And when you implement those kinds of things, that can change your job a little bit. And I think as you're designing courses, facilitating courses, it's really important to make sure that the time you're investing, the effort you're investing is as powerful as it can be, that you're not spending a lot of time doing things that aren't adding a lot of value for your students. And I think sometimes it just takes a minute to step back and think about that and go, oh, wait a minute. If I'm spending 30 minutes doing this, then, I could spend that 30 minutes with some student, giving them one-on-one feedback or tutoring and help instead, which has the potential for a fantastic outcome. So as we go through some of these ideas, if you've listened to me before, they'll be familiar to you. If you have things to add, please add those in the chat. I like collaborative conversations more than just yammering on in front of you. So, and if you have resources or ideas that feed into any of these, please share, and we'll see what we can take away from this. So one of the first things that I see a lot of educators and teachers and trainers do when they're designing online courses and teaching online courses, facilitating them, is that they work really hard to have all of the answers. They look to be the sole source of information. And this having all of the answers comes in a couple of different varieties. One, it's about producing all of the content. And you may have noticed that the internet has like a ton of information out there. And so I like to think about, like, if I'm writing information, if I'm writing content, what value am I adding by recreating something that's already out there? I know that as a middle school math teacher, there were a few things that I taught a little bit differently, and it would be worth the time and effort for me to actually spend the time producing that content because I needed to put my own twist on it. It was something relevant to the context or the relationship I had with my students. But when we're talking about the process for solving a simple two-step equation, that's been written about and documented a million times. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to re-record a video on that or produce that content all over again. We also use a similar model when we're thinking about training people on how to use Moodle, for instance. We've been talking about, live training sessions, which a lot of organizations do, right? They train people how to use a technology or a software. And what we've talked about is, the Moodle docs is really quite good. There's a lot of great information there, but it's hard sometimes for a person to find what they need in those Moodle docs because they don't know the right question to ask. And more importantly, they don't always know the right tool to use. So what we've done as we're developing out, onboarding tools and implementation tools for folks is we spend the time talking about those higher level things. What is it you want to do? What tool do you need to use? And then we let the Moodle docs and those resources that are already out there do the job. It doesn't make sense for us to say, click on add an activity or resource. Somebody else has already done that. So we say instead, consider the open educational resources that are out there, Creative Commons content. There's so much stuff out there that is available for free, and it's licensed in such a way to allow you to incorporate it into your courses. I also encourage you to collaborate with colleagues, whether those are in your own organization, your own school, or in your state or across the country. There are a lot of people teaching the same sorts of things, working in similar roles, training on the same sorts of skills. And then one of my favorites here too is to involve the students. And I like to ask the students to source information and share it. One of my favorite examples is, I see teachers spend a lot of time searching for the perfect video on some concept, or they spend time recreating their own. And, when I think about that, I think about how often or how many times will your students tend to watch that video. In my experience, we're doing well if they will watch it once. So if I ask the students instead, though, to go search the internet, and depending on the age of the student, I might give them some sources to go check out. But I say, you go find, or here's a collection of 10 videos I have found on this topic. You watch them, figure out which one you like the best, think it does the best job explaining this, entertains you the most, whatever criteria you want to set. And then you let the students figure that out and share with you. In that process, we're pretty sure that they will watch at least one video, and more often than not, they will watch more than one. So we're ahead. and they get to see the content from multiple perspectives, not just the one perspective that you like. And the other example I think about here is that when you watch students pick videos from YouTube, some students want the really goofy, silly videos, you know, the cartoon characters, or they really like the ones that draw everything out. And other people prefer, you know, this real guy teaching at the whiteboard and drawing things. Everybody's got a little bit of a different twist in terms of how they deliver the content, and everyone has different preferences. And it's okay to let them experience that and choose and have some input. And then that helps them develop skills that they can use going forward. I also like to let students do the teaching. So if the content is such that there's information out there and they can analyze that, develop that, compile that information and deliver it to their peers, whether it's the whole class or just a small group, then we know that there's great value in that experience and that people retain that information much more than if they just hear it once from you. And the neat thing with Moodle is that you can actually turn these tools into places for the learners to teach. So I can create a lesson and say, all right, here's the lesson framework. You add the first 3 pages about this, and then this other student's going to build another lesson about that. And so they can do that and really engage with you. As you do that, if you look at these alternatives, one, in terms of benefits, it lets you do what you do best. So it's the most efficient, most effective use of your resources. These processes also let you know what the students know. If you let them teach and you let them choose the videos and you let them talk to you about what they're seeing, you have a much better idea of what they really understand versus that multiple choice test where you're like, are they guessing? Do they really know this? What led them to that decision? It also gives the learners an opportunity to build connections, with the content, but also among themselves. And those connections become another resource for them, especially when you're in a fully online space. If a student feels isolated and disconnected, then they're less likely to come back as often. And those connections be really important. And then all of these things give the students more chances to learn because they're seeing, again, the content in multiple ways. I'll revisit these types of benefits as I go through a number of different ideas here. I won't belabor them, but just think about these benefits and how they actually serve your learners as we talk about these ideas. So another way that I see instructors or facilitators really try to have all the answers and make a lot more, do a lot more work than they really need to, is they try to be the first one or the only one to answer all of the students' questions. So if the students post a question, they feel compelled to answer that question. And it's really nice, and I get it. As a teacher, you feel like it's your job and you're not maybe doing your job if you don't answer their questions. But you've got to think about that long-term benefit, right? It is way cool to know all the answers, but if you let the students talk about it and sort it out themselves a little bit, then the learning experience is probably enhanced for them. So alternatives instead, think about creating a space for students to ask questions, but also answer them. Don't make the student just send you an email and have that email land in your inbox and you answer the same email or variations thereof 25 times over. Make that public, make it visible, teach the students how to be self-sufficient, find their own answers. Because sometimes students get lost or confused and they may not even be able to articulate where they're lost. And the way somebody else asks a question or answers it may be exactly what they need. Yes, as we hear ourselves speak, we learn what we believe and what we know. That is so absolutely true. I was in a training session with a client this morning and they had asked a question and I was thinking it through out loud and I was like, all right, yeah, I see how that works. I understand that in a slightly different way now. It's very true. I also like developing FAQs. The glossary module in Moodle will let you create an FAQ. So students can either add to that FAQ, you can take the students' questions and make them FAQs. So you create a centralized resource because we know at this point, right? When learners go out to the workplace or they move from job to job, it's not common for them to get a book on day one that says, here's everything you're ever going to need to know to do your job. We know that they need to be resourceful, and whether that's in the workplace or in real life, right? They're looking up information. And so if we help them develop those skills and that curiosity and the ability to think, I can find that answer, that's so much more valuable than whatever little tiny piece of information that you might feed them. You can also let students or you record videos to cover common topics. So if there are questions that we know come up often, then record the videos. So for example, let's say that I'm teaching an advanced concept in math, and I know as part of that process, I know that the learners to complete that will need to know how to add positive and negative numbers or divide fractions or something like that. And that it's possible that the learners may have forgotten that detail and maybe need a refresher. So I can create a glossary or a database sort of thing that builds a collection of those instructions. You know, if you've forgotten how to add positive and negative numbers, you know, click this video link and then you can watch that. And if I reference that idea in the course, in the context of instruction, I say, so you'll need to add this positive and negative number. Anytime I use that phrase, I can have it automatically linked to that glossary entry and have that pop up right there in the moment of need. So instead of a student getting stuck because they've forgotten this underlying step or this related detail, you're empowering them, giving the information at the moment that they need it. First mention of glossary at 10:25. Yes. Yes. Are you counting? We should probably like give out moot coins for the number of times I mentioned glossary, right? Or some sort of twisted drinking game, but at this time of day, that might be a little bit wrong. So, but yeah, legit. And then another idea here is to let students take the lead on office hours. And you could do this with students in the same class. You could also think about an environment or a setting where you let older students or more experienced students take the lead on office hours for younger students. Because we know that students will have lots of the same questions. And if they can help each other, even if it's them figuring things out together, that has value for both of them. And that kind of goes back to Melanie's idea, right? The students who's taking the lead maybe understands the question or the idea or information better because they've helped someone else address it. Another idea here is that teachers often feel compelled to provide all the feedback. Yes, you did a great job. Yes, you did that complete. Yes, you got a score of 5 out of 5. And there are so many other ways to manage this as well. Yes, when one teaches to learn. And I always think it's an interesting question, which one learns the best, right? The person teaching or the person presumably learning. Right. When you're thinking about providing feedback to learners, instead of feeling compelled to go in and mark everything, think about automated feedback options. So if you build a lesson, you can let the learners answer a question, and then you can provide feedback that is specific to the answer that they provide. You can even remediate and help them address whatever questions or issues they might be having. So if they answer the question this way, I know they've likely misunderstood this. And so I lead them down a little bit path, then address that skill, and then bring them back into the fold. Or I can do quizzes, and not as a summative assessment, but as formative to let them practice. It lets the learner know, like, yes, I'm on the right track. I know what I'm doing. I got the most important information. And it engages them at that moment that they're learning the information and want those answers without having to wait days for the instructor to actually go back and give that back. The quiz or the H5P is also another option, I think, for this automated feedback, and a fantastic way to help the learner figure out, again, that they're getting what you want them to get. I think about the videos, the interactive video tool in H5P we were talking about, and how valuable that is for students, because in a traditional setting, we hit play on the video and the learners sit through it, and they're maybe texting their friend, searching on their phone, watching their favorite TikTok video, and they're not necessarily getting what you want them to get. And even for those who are engaged in the video, it's hard for them sometimes to figure out, like, what was it I was supposed to get out of this? Did I understand it the way I need to? So looking for those automated feedback options frees you up to provide the more meaningful extended feedback that you need to elsewhere to support students in other ways, and it gets the students the information or feedback they need at the moment they need it. And then I'm also a huge fan of peer review. And I've seen several workshops in the conference on the workshop module. So I won't spend a lot of time going into that, but I would say think about ways for learners to give feedback to other students, whether it's a rating scale on a glossary, a rating scale on a forum, a simple workshop activity where they're marking, yes, they did that, yes, they did that, no, they didn't do that, or a complete rubric. There are a lot of different ways that you can involve students in the peer review process without, making it a whole thing. Provide really meaningful feedback. Another way, or another large area where I see teachers and content creators really make things harder than they need to, is they limit access to content. So one way to do this is they complicate consumption. They make getting the content harder than it needs to be. And one of the ideas that comes to mind here that I've seen more often than I should is the course designer who sets restrictions. So this thing is not available until this thing has been completed, and this thing's not available until this thing has been completed. And I can't tell you the number of times where I'm helping address support tickets or questions from people. They're like, well, my learner can't get to the content because the completion won't mark off on this thing because they didn't dot their I and stick out their tongue and cross their eyes all at the same time to get this just right. Yes, I understand there are occasions where you need to do those restrictions, and that's really helpful, but ask yourself, what value am I providing in that way? And is there a chance that I'm making things overcomplicated? Because what I find in experience is that oftentimes those restrictions are set to enforce behavior and address issues for learners who are trying to shortcut the experience, right? And what they often end up doing is complicating things and frustrating the learners who are trying to do what it is they're there to do. The ones who are doing what you want them to do, it gets in their way. So think about that. The other thing, and this is the reason for the cassette tape, is that people are providing content in formats that are not compatible with the way people operate today or the tools that their students have. So for instance, I could really feasibly give all of you a cassette recording of this presentation and go, I've given you the content, right? I'm guessing for Teresa, that's probably just as effective as giving her the link to the document that's on, like neither one's gonna work for her. I would have to, I don't think I own a cassette player like anywhere. I don't know where, but as a teacher, I can say like, that's legit. It is a recording. It's got, you wanna make it easier. You don't wanna complicate things for the learners to get to the content. The thing I see people doing in courses today when they build content would be the equivalent of they're loading things in PDF, they're loading things in Word doc, they're loading things in PowerPoint files, they're loading things in SCORM when there's minimal value in doing so. And this complicates things on multiple fronts. One, if you're loading in a PDF or a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation, if your learners are on mobile devices, they may have trouble opening that. And if they are able to open it, I don't know when the last time was you opened a PDF on a phone, but that is the most painful experience I think you can possibly have because you end up scrolling side to side to try and read the bits of text, and then you're having to zoom in and it's just more complicated than it needs to be. So make sure that you are make sure that you're designing the content in a way that makes it easy for the learner to get it, because if you make it too complicated, then a lot of people are just going to pass right over it and go, yeah, I'll figure it out later. So instead of giving the learners Word documents and PowerPoint presentations, if you have to, do PDF files. I try really hard to avoid that though, because the number of people accessing content on mobile devices is crazy. Yes, Melanie, use the book instead, or the lesson, or the page. Think about ways that you can build content to be responsive so that it actually wraps within the page. Upload presentations to a content site. So I've developed this presentation in Canva. I put a link in the course to this presentation directly there. This presentation is somewhat responsive. I mean, it will shrink, right? It's not going to rewrap the text very well, but the learner does not have to have PowerPoint to access this file. They don't have to have a PDF reader to access this file. So look at the content you're developing, and if possible, build it in Moodle. Odds are that you will get a better end result for your learner. On this front, I also want to talk about presentation SCORM and H5P. As much as I like H5P, I do consider it often when I'm thinking about the potential for learners on mobile devices, because when learners open H5P content, in most of the H5P content tools, maybe most is too much, in the interactive video presentation, those content tools in H5P, if a learner is looking at that content on their mobile device, all they get is the shrunk down version of that content. If I have an image in there with any detail, if my font size is not large enough, then that may be unusable on the mobile device. The same is true for SCORM. I see a lot of people who develop content or have developed content in Articulate Storyline, which again gives you something like a presentation mode. And people are asking their learners to click on things on those screens or look at detailed images or graphics. And on a mobile device, it's just not great. So if you are thinking about content, be really mindful of what that's going to look like on a mobile device. I'd say ideally design for the mobile space first. Know that it's going to work there. If it works there, it's going to work on the larger screen. Not always the case when you go in reverse. And then think about if you like SCORM, if it's doing something for you, take a look at some of the other alternatives to Storyline. Articulate has Rise now, which is responsive. It's not quite the same experience, I get that. But the way I see most people use Storyline, they're presenting content and information, and that can often be converted over to Rise and be just as effective, I think. Yeah, SCORM is just increasingly problematic because of the number of people who are accessing content on mobile devices. And when I see issues with completion tracking, it is often related to SCORM because it's just tricky. But yeah, I haven't seen Lecture in a long time, but yeah, yeah. So another place where I see people making content harder to access than they need to is they get really focused on making content fun, making the course fun. And that usually leads to things like dancing giraffes and 42 colors on the course page and highlighted text and all of those things. It is good because Moodle at this point does limit the ability to do some of that. If you're using the default auto editor that is built in, then anything that you're creating in there is going to be accessible and eliminates the possibility for some of those distractions. But I have found, there are plugins, so I can add colors to my course and things like that. I think you have to be mindful of what the impact of those colors and those graphics and those animations, how that affects your learners, right? If this lady here is talking to me, then I'm probably paying as much attention to the jangling of her bracelets and the cereal that's hanging around her neck or whatever that is, and I have to spend as much time thinking about what she's saying as trying to get past her, her color and the busyness of her outfit. The same thing happens in your courses. If you are spending a lot of time and you have maybe three or more fonts on a page, that actually increases the cognitive load for the learner. And it means they're spending more time trying to get through the formatting of the content than actually processing the content, which is not where we want people to give their attention. So if you're going to add some style and things to your course and you don't want everything to just be the exact same size, which is reasonable, use heading styles instead and use that to organize your content and add emphasis. Take advantage of those heading styles, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, because if users are navigating through unconventional means, if they're using screen readers, things like that, those tools add value. If I just figure out a way to make the text look larger, then yes, I've accomplished something from a visual perspective, but I've lost the opportunity for some of that communication that happens behind the scenes when I'm using heading styles. Keep the formatting simple. Again, no more than 3 fonts per page. And when I say fonts, I'm talking about color, style, everything. So if you've got bold and italics and green, that's 3, you're done. So use bold for emphasis, italics sparingly, be careful about those underlines, just keep it simple. And if you don't like the way your Moodle site works or looks, then invest time and effort in the theme. Build your beauty in there instead of investing a lot of time tweaking every little detail of your course. It is possible to define at the theme level, like what font style you want for every page heading, what font style, what color you want things to be for the topic sections. You can take care of a lot of that in the theme, so you have consistency and some nice look and feel without you having to invest a lot of time and effort, and then you help ensure that it's done correctly. And then strive for consistency, which is part of the value in building things into the theme, right? Because then you know that every course is going to be set up in a similar way. If the learner has to come into each course and figure out what color scheme or, what does red mean in this course versus red mean in that course, you're just making things harder for your learners. So consistency is good, and consistency actually increases the level of professionalism. It's a little counterintuitive, but sometimes the more work people do in a course, the less professional and the less readable it is. The next option here, the next thing that I see people do in terms of making content inaccessible, is they develop their content in a way such that the content is only available online. A lot of learners are in situations that they don't always have online access everywhere. We've heard stories through the pandemic of the people sitting outside of McDonald's or outside of their library or school building trying to get access to the internet so they can access course materials. I know lots of people travel. I know I've worked with kids who, they've got the sporting events in the evening, and so they're spending hours in the car every day, and internet access is not guaranteed in those situations. So I try to think about ways that I can make content accessible. So enable offline access, teach your students how to access content via the mobile app and do it in the offline mode so that they can still access the content. And then think about offering the content in multiple formats. So I know that I mentioned avoid those PDFs, but maybe that is useful as an alternative for learners with limited internet access. Perhaps you deliver the content in the lesson format because that is, you know, your preferred method and it's responsive and we know it works on multiple devices. But maybe in the background, or you have a link, or you actually use the plugin that's built that you can use with the lesson to allow the learner to download that content in a PDF format so they can access it online. So think about those learners as well, because that internet connectivity is really an issue of accessibility, just as much as you know, whether screens are legible and things like that. Prefer using icons instead of color. Yes, that is an excellent way to go, because the color isn't necessarily going to stand out, as you say. Yeah, I had a student once, a long time ago. I was teaching a graduate level instructional design course, and I had the due dates set on the page. They were bold and they were red. And I know more now than I knew then. And it was interesting because the student had said that they had overlooked the due date because they were because they're colorblind. So the red that stood out so well to me did not stand out to them. Now, you know, the text was bold, you know, it's still probably a bit of an issue on the learner's part, but it still was kind of eye-opening for me to think about, like, oh yeah, that I could see where that's an issue. To answer, I'd be interested to hear what icons Rob has to suggest, but I try in some cases to use the Font Awesome icons. Oh, hey, good answer. There we go. Great minds think alike, right? So Font Awesome allows you to, it has a whole collection of icons. They're the same icons that Moodle uses inherently. And the thing that's awesome about Font Awesome is that the icons can be sized just like text. So I can make them, you know, bigger, and they behave differently in the interface. So yeah, cool. And thanks, Lance. That's another great resource. All right, so another area where I see teachers make things harder than they need to is they do all of the talking. There's some irony here, right? It depends on the format though. When I do a live class meeting, I try as much as possible to make sure that I'm not the one doing all the talking. If you are bringing students together in a live class meeting and you're saying, set aside this time, come sit with me, we're all going to, you know, take time out of your evening or whatever, then I say, make sure that they're doing something that they couldn't just do by watching a video. So if you're just going to talk at them, then, you know, record it and give it to them as a video instead. There is no reason to bring a bunch of people into a room if all you're going to do is talk. Now, what makes this different? It's a little bit different because we're having some interaction in the chats, and this is a conference, and the model is just a little bit different. I realize that the learning that comes out of this though is going to be different for every person in the room because the level of interaction is lower. Think about presenting the content in alternative formats so that you're not just talking at the learner. Think about how you can engage the learners, and I'll go back to the idea of letting the learners source the content. Let them come to the live meetings to share information, share ideas. And actually, while I'm thinking about that, for those of you who are delivering live meetings, if you're looking for a resource to help do that better, I'm a big fan of, and I'm sure I've mentioned them before, but InSync Training. I'll put the URL in the chat. InSync Training is a company that specializes, and I have no affiliation with them, by the way. I just know a lot of people are delivering content online synchronously now, and that it often leaves a lot to be desired. And InSync Training has some great free resources and paid training that really can help you up your game in terms of creating that interaction and things like that. It's really cool stuff. Otherwise, think about sessions you've been in and what you like and what you don't like, and what gets you engaged and what doesn't. So the other thing that I see people do in these live meetings is they use it just to deliver information. So, the due date for this is here and the link to that is there. Think again about where else could you deliver that information instead of forcing people to schedule time out of their day to come sit in a room to hear you talk. The other challenge that you have with that is, if I were giving really important information right now that you needed to capture and come back to, you were going to be tested over, I think it would be really hard to keep up and capture every bit of detail. So if you post your information in announcements in the learning management system, you have a couple of advantages. One, it's captured in writing. The learners can always come back to it and review. So they're not wholly dependent on, did I capture what they said correctly? Those announcements will also go out to the learner via email, so they have a copy there. If they weren't able to attend, we know they got the information in a couple of different ways. If you're delivering live meetings, make sure you've planned for learner interaction. Ask yourself, what is the learner doing at every 10 minutes? So at this 10-minute mark, what are they doing? At the next 10 minutes, what are they doing? If they're doing the exact same thing every one of those 10 minutes, then I encourage you to step back and think about, how can I do this differently? The whiteboard tools in Zoom and a lot of these systems are great for encouraging interaction and giving the learners opportunity to provide input. The chat can work really well in this way too. The whiteboard is way cool though. Yeah, think about how you're engaging them. And then make sure that you're using the live meetings to do what you cannot do asynchronously. So think about the activities you're trying to accomplish, what it is you want to achieve, and go, okay, what's the right way to do this? Should I do this live? And at the same time, is there value in that? Why can I do that? Or why is that the best way to do that versus just doing it asynchronously? There are pros and cons. Make sure that you're taking advantage of those and not just doing a live meeting because you think you're supposed to. The next one here is that you feel compelled to grade everything. Grading is a lot, takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And this gets in a little bit to what we were talking about earlier in terms of giving feedback. So some of the same rules apply here. So people try to grade everything by hand. Don't do that to yourself. Try and design those activities that will offer immediate automatic feedback, automatic immediate grades. Learners will love to go through and take those quizzes and lessons multiple times over to see, how do their answers change things? Can they get a higher score? There's a lot of things that are motivational about that. And again, you're attacking the information and supporting the learning at the moment of need and the moment of interest. And then allow learners to give each other feedback instead of you spending time grading those papers and giving feedback on everything. Some people also feel compelled to grade every submission. And that's where I started as a teacher too. The forum feature now that allows you to grade holistically, that's way cool. That makes it easier. You don't have to go through and grade every single forum post. Look at levels of participation maybe across the course, instead of saying every week you need to post, 1 post and 2 replies. Look at the participation across the course, because I think it's reasonable to say you may not have anything to add on this topic. Maybe it's interesting, but everything's already been said, or it's just not an area of interest for me, and I don't have anything new to say. And then it's okay to develop activities purely for learning. The lessons, the H5P, all of those things, it's okay to just do those. Put the completion tracking on it to convey to the learner that you want them to do them, but don't feel like you have to give a grade. And I know we have just a couple of minutes left here. So the last thing that I see people do is they feel compelled to build everything from scratch. They're starting from a blank slate every time they build a new course, and that's just making it harder. on yourself. So if you've had a course before, duplicate it and then change what you need to do. Create your own course template, work with your organization to create templates, because those inconsistencies from course to course, from activity to activity, increase the load for you, increase the load for your learners as they're trying to figure out, like, why does that one thing not work and this one did? You spend time troubleshooting every detail, every setting. So create some templates for yourself. If you know you use a forum a lot, create one in your course or in a separate course that is your master, and then use that every time you create a forum so that you know it's going to work the same way. And then if you're trying to give feedback to learners, find rubrics. Don't feel compelled to create your own. Ruby Star for Teachers is a website that I like a lot for creating rubrics. And then create a collection of common feedback phrases. So you're not trying to find creative ways to say, great job every time. And then my last thought here is that, especially at the start of the pandemic, I heard lots of course designers, facilitators, teachers spend a lot of time worrying about cheating. And I'm still seeing that kind of carry through, because we have lots of learners that were learning at home on their own, not under the eye of their teacher. And so we're really worried about, how do I prevent cheating on these quizzes? And I'm going to say, honestly, I don't think you can entirely. Where there's a will, there's a way, and students are really creative. And this does not apply only to K-12 or academic settings. I can't tell you the stories I've heard about corporate settings and how many like answer keys go around among new staff. You know, new hire, here you go. Here are the answers you need to complete your onboarding. They're just as resourceful. So if you're looking ways to reduce cheating, randomize your questions when you build quizzes, shuffle the questions and answers, set time limits, make sure that the quizzes are set not to allow the learners to see all of the answers forever after they've taken the quiz, so they can't as easily share those with others. Consider reducing the weight of exams. You know, when those exams are 95% of your grade, there's a lot of pressure to cheat and do well. And then considering the proctoring tools, they do exist, but I approach those with a little bit of skepticism, because again, it is really, I have heard that same thing, Melanie. People try to be, they're really creative, really creative. So.
When they do that, I kind of think they had to put so much effort into finding out where the differences were and putting together that list. And they've got to read the list to be able to use it to cheat. They've got to learn something.
That's kind of where I'm at too, right? Like, how many times did they read those questions and see those answers and internalize that? So sometimes I try to decide where to fight my battles, but yeah, the best bets are to create that larger question bank, let students add to the question bank, shuffling the questions. Time limits are another really big one. And then reducing the number of questions per page is also really helpful, because it's harder to take the screen capture. But it concerns me that so many people think that there are ways around this, right? And the teacher will spend more time and effort trying to figure out how to keep a test from being able to be cheated on. And I would encourage them to think about alternative means of assessment instead. So yes, it's, I know cheating is well, it's harder for that first person, right? But if I'm friends with the person that collected those 70 answers, then it's maybe a bit easier for me. But it's funny to me that I hear people say, oh, we're proctoring our students by watching them in Zoom. And I'm like, I've had others kind of test that out. And it's not going to do it. Oh, Jess, thank you so much for putting that link in there. Yeah. So other questions, I realize we are at the end of the hour. I am happy to hang out and answer any questions or share any other resources or chat more. Otherwise, if you're headed off to the next session, thank you so much for your time and for bearing with me today. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Authentic assessments, yes. That is where it's at. Thank you, Annette.